We need some intro music here. We're live. We're live now, but coming at everyone in three, two, one. All right. Welcome to episode 30 of what is now called Beyond the CMS, where we get industry leaders in the content and content platform space chatting about current trends and what the future might be. For folks who are listening in, we welcome you to ask questions. Frankly, ask us anything. We got the original idea for the show from the car guys, which are a couple of car experts that would take folks on a call-in kind of style and do their best to help answer questions about how to make their cars work better. But over here, we're really curious and interested in the world of content and how to deliver content and the systems and people behind that. So thanks to everyone who's made some time to join us on the various channels here. We're live on LinkedIn, Facebook, and Instagram. And we're super stoked to have special guest Mark Demeny join us today, who is a consultant and industry expert in the area of content and content platforms. Just really great to have you join us and looking forward to a great conversation. And folks that are listening in, really just ask us anything. This is a great opportunity to have a great mind to share information with. So Mark, welcome, and maybe you want to introduce yourself.
Sure. So yeah, as you said, I've been in content management for nearly 20 years now, working for a lot of different vendors. Started in Ottawa, working for companies doing content quality and analysis. Ended up working in Vancouver, managing a very large CMS installation, and then now working for a few vendors, doing some advising and consulting, and then also working for the Mock Alliance on a lot of their special initiatives as well.
Awesome. Well, thanks for joining, and great segue. A lot of folks don't necessarily know what the Mock Alliance is. Our customers and the folks who tune into this show now and in the artifacts afterwards are often CTOs, CMOs that are tasked with a modernization or a replatforming, and this work comes up. Maybe just to start us off, do you want to talk a little bit about Mock?
Yeah, the Mock Alliance has been around for a few years, and at the time, they founded really had to do a lot of marketing to sort of educate the market on a lot of architectural principles that we consider very commonplace today. So, things like headless and accessing content through APIs, things like microservices, things like cloud and SaaS. Those were very new when the Mock Alliance was formed, and that's really where the acronym, MACH came from: microservices, API first, cloud, headless. In the last few years, we really shifted the organization to be much more around the business thinking and mindset of those things, because in order to take advantage of that from a technology perspective, you really have to do a lot of organizational transformation in how you buy software, procure, implement, think within an organization. And, a lot of these are really well aligned with agile principles as well. But in order to do that, we've been doing a lot more work around education. We now have an LMS. People can, sign up for courses and get that information as well. We're doing a lot more work around standards and resources to help organizations really understand when they're going through a composable approach. Why should you go through a composable approach? How to do it, how you should structure your organization, how you should think about all of these things from an implementation perspective as well. So that's really what we've been focusing on the last few years.
And how many organizations are there now in Mock?
Around 110. We've got a few more in the pipeline, so that changes on a regular basis, but that's the last number I have.
Okay, pretty awesome. So that's a nice suite of composable vendors that by default have the ability to kind of connect together and have all of those services come together. Cool. And I think you were mentioning, sorry, I think we might be onto the same idea, but Please go ahead. Yeah.
No, I was going to say, some of those are vendors, on the software side, the ISV side, and a lot of others are on the system implementation side as well. So it's really a mix of both. And then we also have a number of ambassadors in the community that are on the client and buyer side as well. And so we really try to balance those three groups in pretty much everything that we do.
Very cool. You were mentioning earlier before the show started some of the work that you're doing on the Open Data Model Initiative. Mm-hmm. And I think it's when we're on this kind of mock stream of thought. Do you want to talk a little bit about that? I thought that was interesting.
Yeah, so we should be releasing around July 7th, assuming everything goes according to plan. But essentially, it's to help architects in organizations doing implementations or SIs to really understand what the moving pieces are in a composable approach. And so, what I mean by that, to give a really quick example, if you have a product catalog in your commerce system and you have a product catalog in your product information management system, what's kind of the contract between those two things, and how does data move within those? And if you think about a product being displayed on a product display page in an e-commerce site, there's a lot of information coming from different sources. So you may have some of the underlying specifications coming from a PIM. You may have marketing copy coming from a CMS that may be personalized. You may have the inventory coming from an ERP. You may have delivery coming from, warehouse management and order management. And so, people implementing these systems, especially if you're relatively new to it, it's really hard to understand the moving pieces. And so what we're trying to do with the open data model is essentially say, okay, these are, both in sort of plain English, but also in things like a JSON definition. Here are the common threads between these things. And then here's, a capability like, say, personalization, which would be an extension on that, really laying out the landscape so that people understand where those things fit together, but then also through what we're calling recipes, documenting the best practices for these things. So, and in a lot of ways, providing different options, because there's no one right way to do anything in a composable approach, but at least to be able to say, here's the information, here's how these things fit together, and here are some recipe examples that may make sense for your use case contextually. Because even something like saying, hey, you're updating inventory. In some cases, updating inventory may make sense to do in real time. In some cases, it may not make sense to do in real time. So there's never a right answer there. But if at least we're saying, hey, here's the cases where doing that in real time makes sense, and here's how to do it. And then here's the cases where it might not make sense. Maybe you're doing daily sync, and maybe it's some legacy system, and at least to sort of explain a little bit of the nuance in all of those different cases and variations. And then long-term, ideally, we get to a point where an architect building these things, might be able to talk to an LLM that has access to all of this data that we've collated, and be able to say, right, I'm building this, and I'm building a B2B e-commerce, with configure price quote, and these capabilities for, managing organizational structures within that. And here's the vendors that I'm using, and, go off and tell me how to build my integration layer and connect these things. And hopefully we can get to that point to do that in time.
Interesting. The title of the show, How to Choose a CMS. And that is a question that we get asked often. And mock represents kind of a concept that may be part of that choice. But maybe just from your experience, can you share a little bit about what's going on today? What are CMOs, CTOs thinking about as they look at, in particular, the suite of headless CMSs? And there's a very similar feature set on the surface. Maybe just share a little bit about what you're seeing out there, and what your approach would be to thinking through the best steps in choosing a modern CMS.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'll jump really quickly to some of the choices in the past and then where we are today, because it's always in evolution. A couple generations ago, a lot of that choice was dictated off of programming language, right? Like, hey, we've got .NET as a skill set, or PHP or Java, and that sort of made your short list, and then you'd work within vendors that were architecturally aligned. And then there was this big shift to headless, and a lot of Mock Alliance members, where the big benefit was you don't have to be tied to a vendor programming language, and you can start to take advantage of SaaS services and build whatever front end in whatever way you want. And now we're kind of at this point where both of those worlds are the value proposition for one approach versus the other has changed a fair bit, right? Every other vendor now has headless ways of delivering content to a front end, so that's no longer a really differentiating criteria in the way it was. And I think what's happening now is, and also at the same time, a lot of the headless vendors, they started just doing content management, right? And a number of them have acquired other things and built other capabilities. Contentful is now doing, page management. So is Content Stack. Content Stack acquired a CDP. And so really the question now is much more along the lines of, okay, so you sort of flip the question a little bit to say, okay, as an organization, where do I want my roadmap for CMS to look like, and who do I want to be in charge of that roadmap? And I think this is a pretty fundamental question, because if you're an organization, you can say, right, I want to be in charge of my roadmap because I care about a differentiated customer experience. And then what that means is I now have an additional set of responsibilities, because I'm picking different vendors, I'm picking different technologies, I may be building things that vendors may not have. Pretty typical example that I've seen is large organizations who are creating a ton of content. They may not like the UX for content creation that a headless CMS vendor has. Maybe they build their own for various different reasons, but they take on that responsibility. The flip side of that is you may, not want to have that extra responsibility. It is a lot more work, and so then you're going back to the vendor saying, okay, I'm happy to buy what a vendor has and work with their capabilities. But then also it's worth understanding where that vendor wants to be going, because there's a lot of different examples out there. If you think about Automatic, the last few years, they have been working on Gutenberg. And that was a big chunk of their product investment, was to build out that capability. Sitecore, last few years, their roadmap has been focusing on shifting to SaaS with XM Cloud. Optimizely has been, purchasing things around content marketing, and, made an acquisition there and doing a lot of integration there, and, fitting that into how you manage personalization and content strategy. And so, I think there's kind of those two fundamental questions. The first is, as an organization, do you want to own your roadmap, or are you happy to let a vendor do it? And there's no right or wrong answer to that. But then the second question is, if you're letting a vendor do it, making sure that their prioritization for their limited, product management resources is in line with where you want to be going as an organization as well. If you were a Sitecore customer and you want to be shifting to cloud, then, by all means, stay on Sitecore and go with them for that journey. If you're a Optimizely customer that has been focusing more on marketing and product strategy, like, by all means, continue with them on their journey. But if, the flip side is, if the vendor is developing in a direction that, doesn't meet your needs, then you sort of need to take a step back and think, okay, what's my ultimate goal for what I'm trying to do with my content management, platform for the next 5 years? Oh, you're on mute there, Chris.
Thank you. There's a little background noise here a little bit earlier. I didn't want to interrupt you. Do you ever see a situation where the scope of the project is enough to actually impact the roadmap of the vendor itself? Like, are they open to figuring out how to adjust to customer needs, or do you have any insights around that?
That's a really good question, and the answer is it depends. And it also kind of, not to get meta, sort of explains why there's a lot of CMS vendors in a market that you would be sort of surprised to see. Because, if you're a Fortune 500 company, you're probably not big enough to push Adobe around, but you might be big enough to push Sitecore around, or, Optimizely. And so, this is kind of one of the questions is, when people are looking at vendors, is what relationship might they have with that vendor? And some of it is they're, local to that vendor. They might have a beer with them on a regular basis. They may have some influence. Now, I don't think it's healthy for both sides to have too much influence on what a vendor does. You don't want to be dragging them around by the nose, because, you may get what you want, but it may not be healthy, in that if they are really prioritizing, you as a client to the detriment of other things, ultimately that may not be healthy for their business. And, that might not be good in the end, because if they're just relying on you for, a lot of that business and a lot of that roadmap, they may not be getting other opportunities, and, maybe less viable over time. And so I think there is a fine line between, feedback, but I think it does have to do with that dance that I talked through earlier. And a lot of vendors do have things like, customer advisory boards. But you sort of want to make sure that your goals are in alignment enough that, they were already going in that direction and you're happy with that direction, as opposed to they're going in that direction and you want to go here and you're sort of trying to drag them there. That's probably not a good relationship for either of you. And if you're in that point, then, maybe it's worth looking at, either other vendors who the roadmap is more aligned that way, or back to that question that we had at the beginning, which is, do you want to own that roadmap yourself? In which case, maybe a composable approach makes sense, where you say, okay, maybe I scale back the relationship I have with this vendor to just say, okay, I just want you to manage content or personalization or, customer data, and I might figure out the rest of those things myself, and, manage the ownership of that myself.
And so, speaking of personalization, there's a lot of definitions of what I guess that actual deliverable is. Everything from some basic rules to present a component versus another component, to real kind of AI-driven assessment and delivery of the content itself. Do you want to talk a little bit about what you're seeing out there from a personalization perspective, maybe some trends and where you think things are going?
Yeah, I mean, personalization has been out there for a while. I think systems have gotten better at delivering content and giving you recommendations. I think there's a few trends that have sort of helped with that. Customer data platforms are becoming more ubiquitous. A lot of vendors have been buying customer data platforms. So, Content Stack bought Lytics, Optimizely bought Zayas, Sitecore bought BoxEver. Adobe bought Omniture years ago, and, used some of those capabilities for Audience Manager. So, in general, having a customer data platform makes sense to assist with that, because then it allows you to not just do sort of that clickstream analysis and personalization, but actually have a longer term understanding of, your client interactions, on the website, with history, adding other channels, et cetera, et cetera. So, CDPs have really kind of revolutionized that a little bit. I think one of the tricky things with personalization, and this has always been an issue, is making sure you actually have the content for those audiences. I think everybody kind of realizes that you can get a fair bit of uplift if you personalize for, different segments and personas, and even, different languages within that. But, if you don't have the ability to create and manage all of those variations, then it makes that process quite difficult.
Mm.
I think one of the things that a lot of folks discover is, and this may lead to our AI conversation later on as well, but like all of the fundamental foundational things that you need to do, like structured content, in order to, and attribution to see how those things are successful. Those are a lot of work, and I think the payoff makes sense if you're doing stuff at enough scale to justify that effort. And I think this is one of the things that people sort of continually struggle with is, I want to personalize. Okay, how much revenue are you doing? Is it, $1 million a month? Okay, well, to personalize properly, that's, one person at or more at 100K a year or more. And so, the numbers just don't work. And so, typically it's really at the higher end where you're dealing with so much volume that, a 3% uplift pays for that person in that program. But it needs to do that financially, right?
Good thinking. Thanks. Just a shout out to folks who have made some time in their afternoon to join the show. Thank you very much. You mentioned the AI conversation, and I know a lot of folks are wondering, a bit hesitant, excited, fearful. There's all kinds of emotions and business reactions going on around AI right now. But as it impacts content platforms and decision making, how do you assess what's going on?
Yeah, there's kind of three different things going on, and all of those three have both an opportunity component and like a real risk and fear component. And so I think a lot of decision making is really, paralysis is too strong a word, but I think a lot of people are kind of in a wait and see moment right now. And I think the first bit where there's some opportunity from the CMS side where we're thinking, okay, we can do this. Back to what we were saying earlier, it's really hard to create a lot of content variations. And I think there's this opportunity with AI to be able to say, okay, here are my audiences coming from a CDP. Here are my different languages, for example. I use this use case, and I think it's appropriate for you in Toronto. Like, it's a huge multicultural city. The top 20 languages in Toronto and Canada, still have large enough cohorts that if you can do that translation, programmatically at scale, then it makes sense to do that, right? Like, yeah, put out Tagalog content. There's a big Filipino community, enough to justify that effort, but only if AI can help you. So, when you're doing things like call to actions and marketing, if you have that ability to say, here are my personas for my CDP, the different groups we're targeting, here are my languages, and have AI create all those content variations. In the past, if you were a human, you'd have to do, 200 bits of content in, 20 different languages, and that was untenable. Whereas now AI can do a decent enough job at it. So I think there's some experimentation to say, okay, how can AI, approach those new scenarios? There's also experimentation within CMS to say, okay, how can AI assist with tasks that humans already do currently? So make sure my grammar's good. Can you rewrite it slightly bigger? Can you rewrite it slightly smaller? Can you, do all these sort of grammar variations there? So I think, AI is, a lot of people are looking at it as potentially being able to help content creation. There's another part of that, which is a little bit more fraught with some fear, which is, okay, now that we're losing search traffic to LLMs, what does that mean? Previously there was a bit of a contract with search engine companies, especially Google, to say, okay, Google's going to let you know what's performing. And the reason they want to do that is because they want you to buy AdWords. And so they would say, here's what's trending. Here's the content that's getting to you. And they were very open with that. LLMs, and you would get the click in the end, right? And so this was really important for a lot of people who were, either incentivized by the click for their company. Maybe they were, media, newspaper, whatever, or they were incentivized by the click because they were a marketer who was, paid off that, getting that information to there, because you could justify your existence within a marketing organization. Whereas now LLMs, they're sucking up a whole bunch of data, and basically somebody asks for something and an LLM will give them the answer. And you don't know that the LLM has given that person the answer, and that might have been based off of your content, and you don't know whether or not they're going to buy or are interested at all, right? Because they're controlling that experience. And so that contract is very much gone. And so I think this has led to, rightfully so, a lot of sort of questions and panic, within the industry of anybody that's producing content, because they're sort of flying blind now, right? They're not getting the analytics that they were, and the question is, how do the brand control that experience for that content that's going to the LLMs? Previously, and this is really interesting for brands in my mind, especially like luxury goods. Previously, somebody like Rolex or BMW or Mercedes-Benz or whatever, you'd get that person eventually visiting your website, and you could control the experience. You could show them really nice typography and, nice pictures and all of those sorts of things. How do you sell something like a, $10,000 watch over a chat, right? Mm-hmm. And so that brand experience, I think is going to be really interesting to marketers as well. And so we may end up getting to this era that, it was kind of like in the radio era and, the before the web era, where, people were advertising on billboards and radio and these other channels that didn't have attribution. And maybe we're going back to an era where that attribution is hard to get, and unless, of course, LLMs open that up, but, who knows if they have the incentive to or not. So yeah, that's kind of a fascinating aspect there as well. And then the last aspect is more around, using AI within content management systems for, more administrative and management functions. So, previously, if you were laying out pages and building templates and building components, AI could help with that. Previously, if you were building, workflows, AI could help with those things as well. So, and it might just be the case where, you create some content and submit it through. And, nowadays an AI may say, oh, this might need a legal approval because you've changed, this text around the terms and conditions. And so there's a lot of potential areas for just the optimization of a lot of the typical tasks. So, on the one hand, that might be really interesting and useful. On the other hand, that may mean, less work for people doing CMS management functions in an organization. It may mean less work for agencies as well. And so, all of these aspects, there's sort of this duality of, opportunity versus, potential risk or disruption, some cases more than others, for sure.
Yeah, we're seeing some real benefits in our ability to use AI to model components and then just speak directly to the CMS. We're kind of trying all kinds of interesting things over here to do a job quicker, but at higher quality, to allow authors to kind of get their workflows AI managed as well. And we're getting kind of a lot of questions from customers about how can we just kind of use our own origin of content and just get it into the CMS and get it published. So lots happening for sure. Mm-hmm. Maybe just time goes by a little bit on the quick side here.
Yeah, I was talking as quick as possible, but
no, it's just such great concentrated information, and really thank you. But before we go, I'd love to just hear your thoughts in general. Like, what do you think CMOs and decision makers should be aware of, or what is the kind of an update on attributes of the mindset of selecting a CMS these days?
I think the big thing right now, and normally I shoehorn this into the AI conversation, is the importance of structured content. I think, in the industry, we've been talking about structured content for a very long time, and all the benefits, content reuse, clear function of purpose for what you're creating, et cetera, et cetera. And I think it's always been a hard sell. Headless CMS has made that a little bit easier because that was sort of one of the core functions of headless CMSs and how they built things. Whereas I think now we're getting to this point where an organization may say, okay, we want to take advantage of AI. And the moment they get one level deeper into the details, initially they think, okay, AI can solve a whole lot of problems, which is true. But you get one level deeper and the detail really is, okay, you now actually do really need to think about structured content, and you do really need to think about a content strategy. And so this is really one of the advantages, because now you can say up to the C-level, like, oh, okay, I want to do a structured content project. In the past, they would say, well, what the hell is the purpose of that? Whereas now it's like, oh, that's to enable AI. And so there's a lot more, budget and attention and importance. And so that's really, one of the nice things is that you've got to do those things properly. And give you a really good example. In the previous world, you really didn't need to think about trimming your content all that much for old information, right? Because what would happen is Google, through the magic of PageRank, if people were linking to stuff and it was valid and that outbound and inbound link was high quality, it would push that stuff up to the top. And so things that were no longer as relevant would just sort of trickle down to the bottom naturally. Whereas to an LLM that's just sucking up everything, all of the content has the same sort of relevance to it. And so if you have stuff out there that's old and incorrect, it will take that and digest it and spit it back as if it was fact. And so previously you could just leave a lot of older stuff on the website, and it would just naturally, through the age of it and sort of the irrelevance of who was linking to it, things would naturally just kind of fall off. Whereas now you really have to be very cognizant of, oh, okay, this content is no longer valid. How do I retire that? How do I archive that? How do I flag that correctly? And so, that overall thinking about structured content and content strategy, you have to be much better at in order to take advantage of AI, as opposed to the opposite, where like I said, people think, oh, AI will just solve it for me. And like, no, it's the opposite of that, actually.
Right. Well, lots to think about. I just want to say thanks to anyone who's taken a moment to listen into the show today. Huge thanks, Mark, for joining us and sharing all of this great information. If you don't mind, we might post a link to you and some of ways to get a hold of you, essentially, in the comments. Also, the show becomes available on YouTube. And if anyone is interested to hear more from Mark, we'll provide a means to make that connection. Thanks again for everyone for joining the show, and we will see you in the next week. All right. Have a great day out there.
Thanks.
Okay. Ciao.